morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is our language seminar. People are probably all familiar or with the India Discovery Center. What we try to do is to see if we can see India from a distance. So Indian history has been written by other people, the Greeks or the Arabs, the Chinese, Englishmen. Many Indians did not care about write about themselves. Now, when we were abroad here, we thought that our children would like to know who we are, and hence the stories would be ours, not somebody else's. And then we tried to make this exploration to see if we can really create a picture. So that picture is hard. We try, and many people who are in this group today have variously contributed. And I would request other people who is to join, please do join. We need help of all kinds. Now coming to language. So when we do this India discovery, it comes to check that what the future youth may do. India has been characterized as an empirical country. Things are given, prescribed, the conduct is defined, the regulations are done. So the science behind it, why something is like something, is not explored. Or if they were explored any time in the past, they are not available. That includes mathematics, that includes music, that includes drama, that includes handicrafts, that includes culture, and that most importantly includes speech. So speech has been a descriptive property that this is how we do, not as a scientific property that this is how we do. So that concept that speech is produced in us has been somewhat of interest to some of us. So what you will see today, hear from Jaspal Singh, is an analysis in that direction. What we have been trying to think that speech is produced in the human mouth, triggered by a thought, and thought has to be detected.
It's Doctor of Optometry, Dr. J. Hi, Doc.
Good to be here, guys. Fire away.
Can you all mute, please? So thought has to be detected. So because in the sense, when I'm speaking to you, a lot of thoughts may be coming to you, and you notice them. So this particular detection of a thought, we call cognition. That is, we can detect. So cognition then becomes a process, a physical process, happens in our brain. We don't know how, but the speech we think is connected to, in its germ, to cognition. So what we are trying to do today is to analyze how cognition has been viewed in Western literature. And then we have a session how cognition is viewed in Indian literature. And we'll gradually move to see if we can develop a mathematical model, how cognition translates itself into speech. Speech is acoustic, cognition is neural. So there's a transfer. Now, to help us today, we have this beautiful presentation you'll be seeing. I saw it yesterday, and it is just splendid. It would be done by Jaspal Singh. Jaspal has been with us for all this time. He has been my friend for more than 30 years and has been always interested in philosophy, literature, language, and culture. He has been a partner in our work here for more than 10 years, ever since we started. We started as a language project to understand Sanskrit, but then we found that Sanskrit has been described as something given to us in the Western style. It came from somewhere else. In the Eastern style, it came from the heaven. So both of those processes were not acceptable to us. But then we thought we should probe further. So what you are hearing today is a presentation by Jaspal. And Jaspal, let me say, has been, as I said before, has been a cultural student of culture. He, I think, has come to this country maybe 40 years ago as a student to Yale to study philosophy. Then he came to Harvard and has been a writer, has been a thinker, and he's probably the most informed person in the community here about the current affairs. But most importantly, you will see his scholarship and erudition as you hear him in his lecture. So welcome you all. The protocol would be that we'll listen him for 45 minutes an hour, the 42 slides. And after finishes, please ask, please discuss. Everything I said is open to question. And please ask everything in your mind, the relevance, irrelevance, the thrust, the science, why should we do, what should we do, what are consonants, what are vowels, how they relate to cognition, detection. We are open to all questions. Thank you all for coming, joining and blessing us. There are very many important people are with us, and I will probably introduce them after Jaspal is done, when all people join in. Now we go to Jaspal Singh.
Thank you very much, Gurudev, and thank you very much for everyone. I've been thinking about cognition for a long time, since I was in business school. I had done my master's thesis on advertising, and advertising pays a lot of attention to why people think what they think. And in those days, we had a special, field in advertising and marketing called consumer behavior. And so since then, I've been thinking about, so today we're going to talk about how cognition has been thought in, viewed in Western thought. So, nope. Hang on. My screen is frozen for some reason.
Try to press space, Jaspalji.
Huh?
Try to press space on your.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to press. And
Page down.
let me try page down then. Okay. So I'm very, very thankful to my
Good,
teachers.
good, okay.
Besides being great teachers and scholars, they were also very, very great human beings. So Bill Jones, I studied existential phenomenology with him at Yale. He was a remarkable thinker. His specialty was also logic. So first day he came in the class, he challenged us, and he always challenged us. He said, whatever argument you can give about anything, I can give you a counter and logical argument about that. So I'm very, very thankful to Bill. Then Hans-Georg Gadamer. He's one of the most prominent thinkers of our times. He was at University of Heidelberg. I was very fortunate when I was in Germany to be able to study with him. He was a very kind and gentle man in spite of his towering figure. So, as students always have nickname for their teachers. So we had nicknamed him Mountain Lion, and very, very nice, kind person. Then third, my teacher, Dieter Georgi, who taught me Greek and Greek philosophy here at Harvard. And then Willard Quine. He was head of philosophy department at Harvard for a while and for a long time in philosophy department. And I studied analytic philosophy with him. And then Helmut Kester, he was also at Harvard, a great scholar of text, and I studied textual criticism. And of course, I'm very thankful to Wampanoag people whose land Cambridge, Boston, Massachusetts is. So I'm very, very thankful to Wampanoag people. Okay, cognition, this is generally agreed upon definition by people in neuroscience, psychology. So cognition, the states and processes involved in knowing, which in their completeness include perception and judgment. Cognition includes all conscious and unconscious processes by which knowledge is accumulated, such as perceiving, recognizing, conceiving, and reasoning. Cognition is a state or experience of knowing that can be distinguished from an experience of feeling or willing. So these are generally agreed upon definitions in the discipline. So cognitive process are the procedures we use to incorporate new knowledge and make decisions based on said knowledge. Perception, attention, memory, reasoning, each of these cognitive functions work together to integrate the new knowledge and create an interpretation of the world around us. So cognition in Western thought. So Western thought in general is anthropocentric, meaning that only humans cognize. Although there are hints in early Greek traditions about animal cognition. It is also very patriarchal. As you will see in these slides, there is no recognition of women thinkers. Karen Warren has actually a few years ago come up with a volume called An Unconventional History of Western Thought, recovering women's voices of last 2,600 years in philosophy. And this is also very Eurocentric. It has a view that European thought is the center of the world thought. And let me just give you a couple of quotations about what it means. Just bear with me 1 second. So let me read Kant. He says, the race of the whites contains all talents and motives in itself. Then he says, the Hindus have a strong degree of calm and all look like philosophers, but they do not know more than they have long known. Then he says the indigenous American people are uneducable for they lack affect and passion. They speak hardly at all, care for nothing, and are lazy. And in 40s, when Surendranath Banerjee and Surendranath Dasgupta, his 7-volume history of Indian philosophy when he gave a talk in London at the Aristotelian Society. And he talked about, epistemology of Vedanta. So G.E. Moore, who was a prominent analytical philosopher, after Das Gupta finished his talk, he said, well, whatever he said is not philosophy, and everybody laughed. So this prejudice has been very much part of the Western philosophical thought, especially that which is taught in the academia. So modern psychologists and philosophers are studying animal cognition. So I will start with cognition in Native American traditions, dating back to at least 800 BCE to present. So one thing striking about it is that most of the Native American philosophers from ancient times have been women. So in that sense, it's matriarchal, and it has historical social reasons. So for cognition, they have many elements or features. So one concept they have is blood memory. They say your blood has certain kind of memory. Then another element in cognition is performative knowledge. That is when you perform a role or perform an art or a ritual, that also participates in your cognition. Then another concept or another element of cognition they have is called embedded cognition. We'll talk more about it when we come to Heidegger, but it basically means that your body and your environment all together participate in cognition. So then they also claim that visions, stories, and metaphors, they also form part of your cognition. And cognition is an interaction of body, mind, spirit in nature. So some of the prominent Native American philosophers are Anne Waters, Wayne Deloria, Willa Cordova, Thomas Norton Smith. So one of the main insight they have into ontology or nature of things is that everything is related and constantly changing. The essence of any particular thing is what it is only insofar as it relates to what it is not. So very profound statement. So let's start with the European philosophers, starting from 600 BCE to present. So Thales is considered to be the first philosopher. For him, all cognition has three features: experience, intuition, and observation. So like all early Greek philosophers, he's a materialist, and he thinks that everything comes from water and then it returns to water. So there are other materialists of his times and his students: Anaximander, Xenophanes, Anaxagoras, Empedocles, and the atomists. So they all believe that experience, intuition, and observations are the constituent of cognition, and that all life is made of these elements. So now we come to next important Greek philosopher, that is Heraclitus. So he said, evidence of the senses, the thing of which there is sight, hearing, experience, I prefer. Sight is the best of the senses. The eyes are more accurate witnesses than the ears. Then he was very critical of earlier philosophers like Hesiod, Pythagoras, Xenophanes, and Hecataeus. And he says, collecting information is not understanding. So he said, learning many things does not teach understanding. Else it would have taught all these philosophers something. Then he says, like all materialist Greek philosophers, that all men have a share in self-knowledge and sound thinking. So for Heraclitus and others, philosophy was a very democratic pursuit, that anybody can do it. Everybody has this, share in self-knowledge. Sound thinking is the greatest virtue and wisdom, to speak the truth and to act on the basis of an understanding of the nature of things. Then he says such an understanding can result only from an ability to interpret the language of nature. So he says that our interaction in nature is sort of embedded in certain understanding, and that has its what nowadays one will call a cognitive language. The proper understanding allows one to act in harmonious way. So tweaking and cognizing this cognitive language of the nature, we can actually live in harmony. So then you have Epicurus. So he goes a little further and he says certain simulacras, they're just like what modern days we can say, like some small films of any object in nature. They sort of penetrate directly on your mind. And it is because of that penetration in your mind, which he thought was located in your heart or in your chest, that we can actually cognize these objects. So then he says that language sometimes can become a great barrier to clear thinking, because language prejudices us by giving certain labels and certain names to objects. And then he says, for example, he says that we have a word for death, but it is meaningless. And similarly, he says, for example, we have a word for immortality. He says these are empty sounds. So he says words should be understood in their basic sense. That means having content. So after that, we come to Plato. He says noesis, that is intuition or immediate perception without mediation, is the highest form of cognition. And then we have dianoia, which is dianoia means two kinds of brains. So it says discursive thinking, that this is the dialogue that happens in your brain. And ikasia, that is imagination, imagining. Pistis, that is faith, belief, and trust. All of these go into forming cognition. But he says intuition is the highest in terms of hierarchy of these elements. Then we have Aristotle in his most famous work called De Anima. So he says there is an anima or soul of all beings. Animals, plants, and all animals, all entities have anima or soul. Then he says there is nous. Human beings have a mind. And this mind is of two kinds. Nous potikos, which is active mind. It's a craft, light, deathless, and everlasting. And then there is a passive mind, which is like matter and perishable. And human beings need both to think. So then Aristotle goes further and he talks about relation of sensation and object and how we cognize. So he says sensation involves the alteration of the sense organ by the object sense. So he said by the process of sensing, the object alters our sense organ as well. The objects sensed are external to the senses, and upon them to configure them and act upon them to configure them in characteristic way. The sensing faculty becomes like the object sensed. And this underlies the alteration or configuration of the sense organs. So there is an interaction that alters the sense organ as well. And this underlies the configuration of the sense organs. Counting also as intentional and as having an interior side, that is, as being a type of cognition, an act of sensing, as well as a physical state of the organ. Think of the sensible species or likeness of the object O as a certain configuration of the sense organ, by virtue of which the animal senses in the O way through that organ. So some people say that Aristotle, in a way, anticipated the activation of the neurotransmitters. So then he says sensing is an operation of a physical or material organ. And this is why each sense is limited to a fixed range and intensity of object. In addition, sensing is the foundation for imagining, remembering, etc. A corresponding account can be given of feelings or emotions. Feelings are the interior aspect of certain physiological changes wrought by sensing or imagining or remembering, etc. And they have the objects of those sensing or imaginings or remembering, etc. as their own object. So then he talks about intellection or cognition by mind. Intellection is similar to sensation in that the intellect becomes like the object which is understood. He conceives of sensation and intellection by analogy with a composition of material substances from form and matter. So reality, he says, is object constituted by matter, configured by form. Sensation is matter or sense organ is considered by form, sensible likeness corresponding to object, and interaction, which is a matter. Passive or receptive is configured by form, likeness corresponding to object. So now after Aristotle, you actually have almost of 1,000 years of what is called Dark Ages. The whole Western thought is dominated by the church, Catholic Church. And there are important thinkers like St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, St. Anselm, and others. But they are in the tradition of the church. They are religious thinkers. And they are not considered philosophers per se. So then we come to, in the 16th century, to Francis Bacon. He says that human beings only understand as much or cognize as much as they can observe in nature with things or phenomena, and whatever the senses permit. So he says, and neither knows nor is capable of more. Then he makes a very crucial point for his thought, that the tools that we use, including hand, they also participate in our cognizing and become instrumental in our understanding. Then he makes also important point that knowledge is power. He says knowledge and human power are synonymous. Since the ignorance of the cause frustrates the effect, for nature is only subdued by submission, and that which in contemplative philosophy corresponds with the cause in practical science becomes a rule. So now you can see this is already beginning, or sort of a rise of enlightenment or the age of reason in Europe, and sort of a philosophy in a way, or science is trying to separate it from theology as well as from philosophy. So he's considered the father of inductive method, which says we start from particulars and then come to general abstractions. But to do that, he says we have to renounce all a priori notions and begin to form an acquaintance with things in themselves. So after, then we have another important philosopher, that is Spinoza. He had a big impact. And he says there are three types of cognitions. You have imagination or opinion, reason or ideas. And then he says intuitive knowledge. So he thinks, or according to his system, intuitive knowledge is the highest knowledge because it is not mediated by anything. It's direct perception. Then you come one of the most philosophers who left a very lasting impact on the European philosopher. He says that we get data from our senses, but sometimes our senses are not reliable. So how can you trust something which is not reliable, even if they have deceived you just once? So then he says, so after thoroughly thinking the matter through, I conclude that this proposition, I am, I exist, must be true whenever I assert it or think it. He says, I can cognize my own existence without any doubt. So he then gives rise to this Cartesian dualism. We'll see how this dualism of mind and body, of mind and senses. And this says that even entities, objects, bodies are not perceived only by senses or by imagination, but by the intellect alone. Not through their being touched or seen, but through their being understood. And this helps me to understand that I can perceive my own mind more easily and clearly than I can anything else. So then this is his famous general rule. So I now seem to be able to lay it down as a general rule that whatever I perceive very clearly and distinctly is true. So then he also talks about that I have many ideas, all kinds of things, but some of these ideas seem to be innate. So these innate ideas are not dependent on any sense or any input from any senses, or my understanding of what a thing is. So I have some innate ideas. So he says I get some data, but then other things I have innate, which I can cognize. So after that, we have Immanuel Kant, who's one of the most influential philosophers in Europe. So he says cognition and knowledge are two separate things. So cognition, he calls it Erkennen, a German word, and knowledge, Wissen. So there he goes. He says we have perception, which is a representation of a thing with consciousness. Then we have sensation, a perception that relates only to the knowing subject as a modification of its own state. So there's a lot of similarity between this and Aristotle, and without reference to any other object. So then cognition is objective perception. Then you have intuition, cognition relating immediately to an object, which is single. Then you have empirical intuition, wholly contingent sense perception of a single object. Then you have pure intuition, object necessarily joined to all empirical intuitions in advance of any particular perceptions. There are two pure intuitions, and they are space and time. Concept, a cognition relating immediately to an object by means of some feature that several things have in common. So we carry on with Kant. So then he says there is empirical concept. A concept of what several objects of sense perception have in common. And pure concept, a concept what objects must have in common. And notion, a pure concept having its origin in the understanding alone. An idea, a concept of reason, not understanding, transcending the possibility of all experience. As if with other concepts, these may be pure or empirical. Now we come the grand old man of European philosopher, that is Hegel. He says knowledge does not relate to anything beyond experience, but is itself the ultimate or absolute object. So then he says we have sense certainty, then we have perception, which is knowing what an object is, which requires mind's mediation. Then we have understanding, unity of cognitive object and subject. Cognition, just like Kant, he makes us erkennen, to know in what the objects determinate, substantial nature consisting, and knowledge, wissen, practical interest of self-consciousness. Then he says self-consciousness achieves its satisfaction only in another self-consciousness. Consciousness is the mental function that accounts for ordered experience and which provides us with a unified experience of reality. Instead of a chaotic flow of meaningless information, by means of consciousness, we are therefore able to represent and process in a meaningful way the stimuli that fall in our phenomenal space. Then he says self-consciousness, he qualifies it, exists in and for itself when and by the fact that it so exists for another. That is, it exists only in being acknowledged. Then he talks about his dialectic method. In this method, dialectic laws are observed and the unity and struggle of opposites can be found. Opposites of cognition processes move, condition, and complement each other. They make cognition process continuous and ongoing. There is a transition from one cognition stage to another one. The notion is cognized as real idea in a dialectic movement. Then you have Karl Marx, who was a Hegelian at one point. Karl Marx and Bruno Bauer were great philosophers of their time in Germany, and they were called left Hegelians. And then they broke with Hegel. So they say, Marx says that cognition is human sensuous activity to satisfy needs. Humans have to be before they can think. So remember Descartes, Cartesian dualism, I think, therefore I am. Marx would say, I am, therefore I think. The assimilation of the external world, which is at first biological, subsequently social, and therefore human, and occurs as an organization of the raw material of nature in an effort to satisfy needs. Cognition, which is a factor in the simulation, cannot evade this universal determinism. And he further says, for all consciousness is actually born of practical needs. And the act of cognition itself is a tool designed to satisfy these needs. Then he says, this is his very famous statement, opposite to Descartes and Hegel, that life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious existence. And the existence of man is their actual life process. If in all ideology, men and their circumstances appear upside down, as in a camera obscura, this phenomena arises just as much from their historical life process as the inversion of objects on the retina does from the physical life process. Then you have Edmund Husserl. He probably has had the greatest influence in modern European and continental philosophy. He was a student of Franz Brentano, and he has, until this time, some of the most lasting influence. So he says, all consciousness is intentionality. Consciousness is always consciousness of something. Intentional acts as momentary components of certain trans-temporal cognitive structures, dynamic intentional structures, in which one and the same object or state of affairs is represented throughout a period of time, during which the subject's cognitive perspective upon that object or state of affairs is constantly changing. So for him, our starting point is what he calls state of affairs or phenomena. So then he says, these are his categories. We have a noema, which is perceptual content. Then you have experience. And this experience has many objects in it or concepts. They're religious, mythical, aesthetic, perceptual, linguistic, and bodily. Then consciousness is a rich field where believing, loving, hoping, feeling, willing, imagining, perceiving, sensing, remembering, attending, anticipating, and all other conscious and unconscious acts are performed, and the meaning of objects of these mental acts are disclosed. And then he calls his work phenomenology, which is science of all sciences. So he says experience in a phenomenological sense includes not only the relatively passive experience of sensory perception, but also imagination, thought, emotion, desire, volition, and action. In short, includes everything that we live through or perform. Then he has other categories: noesis, act of consciousness; nomata, object of consciousness; and bracketing. This category is very, very important. He says knowledge is only possible by bracketing all assumptions about the world and experience. Then we have Martin Heidegger, who was a student of Husserl. They're also called Vienna Circle. So he says, practice is more primordial than cognition. He said, Dasein, he really creates new terminology. He says, human existence. He says, human existence is being in the world with others towards death. So the old categories that other philosophers use, that you have human beings, that have you entities, then you have objects and other human beings. He says that is not how human beings experience world. So this is one category, Dasein, being in the world with others towards death. So it's one category. And cognition, he says, of several kinds, or constitutes many things. So remember, we talked about, when we talked about Native American philosophy, I referred to embedded cognition. So embedded cognition is interaction between body and the world. Then there is embodied cognition, in which body plays decisive role in cognition. Then you have inactive, which is actively, we create actively our environment to interact. Then you have extended cognition, where it says mind does not reside in brain, it extends to the world. And then we have affective cognition, in which he says emotions play an important role in cognition. So you can say it's very, very different thinking from the classical thinking. He says our average everyday dealings in the world are not guided by cognition. Rather, they are matter of engaged familiarity. And in his famous work, Sein und Zeit, he says this is the monotony of everydayness. We are familiar with our environment and the paraphernalia we encounter in it primarily through our skills, abilities, competences, rather than through cognition. So then he says, Dasein, that is our existence, human existence, is in its world not primarily by being conscious of it or having beliefs about it and intentions to act in it. Rather, Dasein is most fundamentally in its world by being familiar with it. So he places traditional notions of consciousness and intentionality with a triple faceted analysis of, he says, understanding, by which he means practical understanding, that is to say, know-how, competence, skillful mastery of the world around it. And he turned this term understanding. He says understanding is something that we stand under. That's why it is understanding. Then we always have a mood, which is our disposedness, sensitivity to how important something is and the way things matter to us. And then, of course, he says language. And language is not in a limited sense. He says it's a discourse. It's the ability to articulate the world. And another important point he makes about this language, he says, you don't speak language. Language speaks through you. So then you have Merleau-Ponty. He's also a student of Husserl and Heidegger. Is a sort of a groundbreaking work, Phenomenology of Perception. He argues for embodied cognition. Cognition not regarded anymore as brain-bound. Cognition is realized by complex patterns of interactivity between brain, body, and world. Cognition is distributed over brain, body, and even world. He says the lived body or body proper, the body known as a physical, not as a physical object, but as experience from the first person perspective, subjectively. Perception is not a matter of passively representing the external world. Perception is a bodily activity. It is something we do as embodied agents and is closely interconnected with action and motivation. Then he says every perceptual habitually is a motor habit. So his work sort of led to a lot of upheaval in psychology and philosophical psychology. And then we have Hans-Georg Gadamer, and he probably exerts most influence in present-day scholarship. He says cognition unreflectively depends on the historical context in which it occurs. Context dependence involves tradition and historicism. Our pre-understanding is pre-given, not as a set of axioms that we can select and adopt in freedom. It is rather an atmosphere into which we grow. He is also a student of Heidegger, so you can hear Heidegger there. A milieu, a historical tradition that forms us. That is all around us. It is part of our everyday practice. It takes the form of a set of stories that we tell about our life and by which we live. Such stories are intricately related to stories of others, which are culturally shared notions and historically shaped values. The result of interpretation is a change of our pre-understandings, a change of our horizon into a mutual horizon, which he calls fusion of horizons. So we also have William James, prominent American philosopher. He says cognition is a function of consciousness. The first fact it implies is therefore a state of consciousness wherein the cognition shall take place. Whatever elements an act of cognition may imply, besides, it at least implies the existence of a feeling. Knowledge, cognition of realities, meaning by realities things that exist independently of feelings through which their cognition occurs. If the content of the feeling occur nowhere in the universe, outside of the feeling itself, and perish with the feeling, common usage refuses to call it a reality and brands it as a subjective feature of the feeling's constitution, or at the most, as the feeling's dream. Then you have great British philosopher, Russell. He says cognition has 4 components. You have perception, memory, belief, desire. And in his monumental work called Analysis of Mind, he goes in detail in each of these categories. So to summarize, the Western tradition about cognition, you can see there are basically 2 schools. One is materialist, which says cognition, ideas, thought, consciousness, they are reflection of interaction of being in the world. So if it can be reduced in one axiom, it says existence precedes essence. Then you have the other side, the second, that is school of idealism, that cognition arises due to a priori knowledge of soul, forms, spirit, mind or being, and God revealed by a revealer. So the axiom here becomes essence precedes existence. So Western philosophy has actually developed a great deal in a dialogue between these 2 schools. And lot of dialogue back and forth has gone. And of course, they learn from each other, as we saw. So I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to look at this material. I hadn't looked at this material for a long time. So once again, thank you very much.
All right. So I assume that you can take questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So people who would like to ask questions, naturally a lot of material went through, many technical terms. So I like people to understand them, whatever we can. So why not do one following? Like in the chat box, indicate that you have a question, and then they will unmute you, or you can probably unmute yourself, but be orderly, one question at a time and so on. So indicate in the chat box I have a question, and then unmute and ask the question.
Jaspal, thank you for such a, this is Jaydev. Thank you for such an illuminating talk. Obviously, it's a lot of material that is covered in the last 45 minutes, but each philosopher may himself take a lot of time to be understood. But the question that comes to me immediately is, in the last few slides, you were talking about that familiarity and presentation means cognition is something separate from familiarity and practices, etc., which comes from by living in the world, right? But isn't it that the practice and living in the world itself includes cognition, maybe at a passive level? We are not going in the world totally blindly. Even if I'm following habitually, I'm performing something, there's still an element of knowing what I'm doing.
Well, that's what Heidegger says.
Let me just interrupt one thing. Everybody should introduce themselves with a question, since we're recording it, so that it can be also, many people may not know each other. So I did not do the full introduction at the time. So I think he's Dr. Jaydev Dasgupta. He's a physicist and is a part of our team. Okay, proceed. But the rest of the people who ask questions, kindly introduce yourself.
So yes, Jasper.
So that's what, for example, you can take either Husserl or Heidegger, Marx or Brentano or Gadamer or Merleau-Ponty. They say we have, before cognition, a biological cognition, which is primordial.
Biological cognition, if we look at it, what is biological cognition? Biological, if I take purely from a scientific point of view, biological is a material process, right? So how is this material process comes as some kind of a cognition or some kind of a knowledge? Because for knowledge itself, you need some cognition. I mean,
well, see, if you take Heidegger, he says, for your habits, you don't need cognition. They are primordial.
So does he mean by that it's cognition by cognition?
That is why, his definition of a human being is human being in the world with others towards death.
Yes. Yes.
So right. It's a mouthful.
I think in the spirit of our seminar here, we are not analyzing what's right or wrong.
Yes.
We're analyzing what people have said in different times and the evolution of their thought. We don't say they're right or wrong. And again, when I do the Indian also, the same thing will happen. So it is not everything is right in that context, as they said, the followers of it. So what we have to understand is that the evolution of ideas in time and where we are. So since the research seminar, you take your own view from it, that these are where the loopholes are, blanks are, and can we fill it? So it's not that he's right or he's wrong. Everybody may be wrong. Everybody will be right. So this is what I will say. Carry on.
And just see, and you also have to see the context. They are basically arguing against Descartes
Okay.
with his dualism, that you have objects there and then you have mind. So they say, you know, the phenomenologists, starting with Husserl, they say, no, that is not how it is. That we are very much embedded in this state of affairs or in this phenomena in which it acts upon us and we act upon it.
Okay.
So that is the context.
Thank you.
As I understood Jaspal's talk, it looks to me that it has all centered in understanding the human being. So basically, you analyze what the human being is. Like you have a body, you have a mind, you have senses. So question is, then you determine how these things cooperate, integrate, and then give you information. And as you said, I think Heidegger you said, that is, or Hegel, that is from a particular, then you go to general.
That's Bacon, Francis Bacon, yeah.
Bacon.
Yeah.
So that part has to be understood, which is very different in the Eastern ideas. I don't know whether we as a general sample here in this group, how we think. That is, the Eastern idea is the class or the universal. A tree is not this tree. Tree is a larger object than this particular tree. So I learn from an animal, that animal is not my pet animal. So that concept, we do not know the development of that concept. That's a class would exist before the particular. Now, whether that's a development, something will happen in music or arts or nutrition or everything. So the question then is, who treats or who heals or who learns? So I think that's a difference there. This is what I took from Jaspal.
Those questions arose amongst the Greeks also. So for example, Plato, he says there are pre-existing essences.
Right.
For example, this table or this object, it's only a reflection of an ideal object, or ideal that pre-existed. There is a pure form somewhere. There's a pure category,
right,
or there is a pure, something that exists, and which sort of Aristotle also imbibed in. But he says he sort of inverses it. He says this essence that Plato describes, we arrive at it by discussing each particular object and classifying them.
Yes.
right,
Yes.
So that's why he's, he develops this encyclopedia,
right.
and he categorizes. He says once we start, categorizing things, then we observe that there is an essence. There is a class.
Right, but he also said in one of the philosophers at the late time that we create the universe through our understanding, which is scientific. But to say that universe exists, even if we don't understand, is a different thought, because we are divorced from it, because we are only small object in the large universe. So who cares whether we understand what we understand, how much we understand? But the subjective word that you used, Ponti probably,
Ponti, Merleau-Ponty.
Right, that we operate on a subjective universe of our own, which is probably real in the sense real to us, but to make a class out of it, to understand that everybody else also have their own subject universe. And hence the knowledge is not my knowledge as his knowledge. So knowledge is smeared all through, and to find what the knowledge is, whether that probably has not been attempted or maybe would be attempted at a later time. This is what I would think. Whereas the Indians, or as far as we know, they come from the other angle, or maybe they came from this angle, but then they turn it upside down, saying that the universe exists no matter what, and we are temporal. Man is temporal. Your thoughts are temporal.
Well, that is Plato as well as Hegel, you know.
Right.
In his work, Phenomenology to
Right.
Geist, he says all this universe is just manifestation of Geist, of spirit. So a lot of these ideas of Husserl, Brentano,
Right.
Heidegger and Marx, they are actually reaction to Hegel.
Okay. And people who are interested in this, see, I think what Jaspal ended in the idealistic, this thing, the essence precedes the existence. So what we have been thinking and confronted with, that essence is an analog word. You know, I mean, this meeting has an essence, but that essence is cannot be quantified. The question is, since the human beings are limited, we breathe, we have processing power, we have brain activity. So the essence has to be fragmented in order to be understood. So that essence, the fragmentation of essence, becomes our thought that whether, who does it, how does it do it, how essence manifests itself in the...
Hey, Heidegger has a very beautiful concept like of that. He calls it care.
Okay.
That human beings, you know, like otherwise you have, you know, he said, you know, monotony of everydayness. But it is due to care that human beings can live an authentic life by giving them, or what he calls a resolve, giving themselves a project.
Right.
And then, you know, then he says, the German word Dasein, then he steps out of this monotony of everydayness.
Okay, other questions?
This is Kumar. Can I go next?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Jaspal, thank you so much for summarizing and synthesizing.
Introduce yourself.
This is Kumar Nuchur from Newton. Many of you I have seen before. Thank you again, Vijay Babu and Jaspal, for a wonderful summary of the Western philosophical tradition. I have a few comments and questions. I was glad to note that Karl Marx is on the camp of Vedanta in saying I am, and therefore I can think, as opposed to Descartes, who got it the other way. Is it a good, correct statement, Jaspal, that on this matter there is the I am, therefore I can think, is the idealistic Vedantic phrasing of the truth, as opposed to Descartes' dualism based on mind and matter, based on thinking before being?
Yeah, I mean, Marx and Heidegger and others, for them, being or, you know, existence precedes essence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, the other point I wanted to ask was, in many of the slides, there is the use of the word consciousness, but in my readings, and I would like to check with you on this, there is a total mix-up of categories in terms of mind and consciousness being mixed up in the discussions, in the language. The separation that we make in Vedanta between mind and consciousness, I find that missing in any models of cognition with that clarity.
Well, you know, different people, see, their context is very different.
Yes, yes,
They are fighting their battles within their context.
correct.
See, for example, just like to G.E. Moore, when Surendranath Das Gupta
Huh.
talked about epistemology of Vedanta, he said it's nonsense. Because within their categories,
Yes.
those things don't make sense.
Uh-huh.
So we have to take these categories within the context in which the discussion is taking place.
And I should also comment the same thing I did for Jaydev. That is, our goal here is to expose what people thought and not to be qualify them whether they were in this or that. So the qualitative judgment of anything regarding whether they followed India or not, or anything they did, what he did, Jaspal did, I thought he did excellent, a survey of the major milestones that has happened in the West and the evolution of ideas.
Yes.
Now, in those ideas, I think as a research seminar, people can really find holes. But we are not today to really resolve those holes. Hopefully we'll resolve them in a year. But let us understand that the different shades of terms that were used. But I should also warn that the English translation of various terms may not be strictly correct.
So that is, I think, very true, because a lot of people have translated Hegel's, phenomenology of Geist, either, phenomenology of mind and phenomenology of spirit, which are two different things.
Yes, yes.
Similarly, like Heidegger's work, like when you read it in German, or Plato, when you read, for example, logos is translated as word. That, like in Koine Greek, which I studied with Dieter here, it has nothing to do with word. So that is another problem of translation. So it is, and the other thing is, like, I just gave you view of these people, what they thought. I didn't tell you what I think of each of them, which we can have conversation some other time.
Yes.
Right. I think also on behalf of India Discovery Center, I have to make one comment that the question does come, and may be coming very prominently in the children, that why India did not get into the scientific thought of the 18th, 19th century. We can all say that it was occupied or something happened, but there's a larger cause there, that to do this analytic thinking of objects was not something developed in that fashion. Because once I divorce myself from the scene, then I don't observe the scene. So that concept that the observer is you, and hence the reality exists, and hence I must probe further. What I probe may be incorrect, but probe I must. Not to induct myself that since my probe will be futile, let me pray, or let me think, or let me reveal myself. So that is the difference there. I have not seen that this has happened, but we're examining that definitely somehow a sense of complacency did come in, by which, now given that, I must also stress that early Indians were massive scientists. Panini must be a brilliant scientist. Any musician must be a brilliant scientist. Mathematician, Jains were strong scientists. So that did happen, analytic inquiry, which basically says that I must create a new world because I don't accept the previous world. But once you say the world is this, and I am living in it, then it becomes different. So that transition we will probe further, but we shall see whether we can really bring it
See,
out.
just to make a point, like, see the insight that Heidegger has into language. He says that you don't speak language, language speaks through you.
Yeah.
That's a very, very important insight. Because
Yeah.
and he spends a whole lot of time sort of unfolding it. And, I mean, those of you who are interested, in like modern European philosophy should really read Heidegger.
See, Bella is here. Bella, do you have a comment?
Bella, I'm
Bella
sorry, I wanted
Kosharas.
to talk about George Lucas.
He's our neuroscientist.
This is a
Hungarian
gentleman
philosopher.
Shivram. He
Yeah.
has been requesting to talk.
So
Yeah.
Shivram.
yeah, I think that I first of all I have to congratulate Jaspal. So it was a wonderful summary, and not just summary, a detailed summary about the whole history of development of great thinkers, and it is absolutely phenomenal how the Greeks and the Romans.
So for introduction, Bela Kosharas is a neuroscientist, and he worked many years in Harvard Medical School, just retired. He's a part of our language group and a friend of mine for 30 years. Go ahead, Bela.
Yeah, so the Greeks and the Romans, how well developed concept have about the brain function. But it was a little bit interesting as Jaspal interpreted it. Aristotle told or thought that the sensation that we got through the sensory organs, the sensory organs got altered by the external stimuli. That is true, absolutely, because the sensory organs get excited and working to convert the analog information into electrical form. But I have to add that so without the brain function, there is no sensation.
Yes.
So if we have sensory organ, but we don't have brain function, normal brain function, there is no sensation. We don't know about the external world without a normal brain function. So and so this means that it is a very complex but very well interwoven network, the whole human being, because destroying or separating one part, then the whole function is disrupted.
Yes.
So we'll say that the brain function can be switched off, or the intentional?
Is essential, yes.
I know essential, but isn't it automatic that suppose a sun rises, so my sensing tells that there's light, so brain automatically activates itself, or I have another process which I have to indicate that brain look at the light source?
So then you suggest whether the light perception getting conscious for me or not.
Right.
So that's about a kind of deeper function of the brain, because if you think of a child who first get the light into his sensory organ, the vision, the kid doesn't know about what is that, but he just experiences. So it is as Jaspal is told, and some thinker thought, that the external world is independent from us and it exists. And how we have a concept of the external world, it depends on our mind, our thinking, and not just our thinking as Descartes told, or the other thinker, but later somebody told that it depends the history and the environment also depends how do you think. So I'm just thinking about how truth is that, because if you think about, for example, how the people have a concept about their surrounding and the event and the action of the life, if you live in North Korea, or if you live in Russia, or if you live in somewhere.
Right. Now you're not going into extension of it. So don't go into create new theories. I think what we need to understand is from Jaspal's presentation and with his evolution of different terms, as much as we understood, so to see that this is where I can contribute, or this is where I see, or this is where I know he did not cover, or this is what I can add to this thought process. As I told the previous two, that the thought process itself, the totality of it may not be applicable, may be wrong, erroneous. So that's not our discussion yet. But I have a small question for you as a neuroscientist. So the process of detection, so the child sees the light. So that detection can happen independent of the understanding.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's where the point is. Point is that the brain is active enough, the sense has an immediate communication to the whatever brain functions are, to have an external event occurred. Now, whether that external event is processed, understood, mapped, or discarded is a secondary process. So,
see, that's what Gadamer says,
okay,
right?
all right, okay.
So this stimuli or this signal that comes, then it sort of interacts with our pre-understanding.
Okay.
And then sort of enriches or corrects it or edits it, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have, what is called, new horizons or fusion of horizons.
We have a distinguished physicist with Bashant Machwe, a professor, and he has been applied physicist for a long time. Do you have any comments, sir? We're blessed that you have joined us.
Vijayji,
somebody
there is a gentleman, Shivaram. He has been asking to raise question.
Right. So let Shivaram ask first.
Namaste. Thanks for allowing me to be part of this meeting. I must thank Indian Discovery Center for this. I'm Shivram. I'm doing my PhD at Jain University in Bangalore. I had a wonderful scholarly listening from you, sir. Thank you for that. And my question is a very simple one. I think consciousness is probably a very complex subject for me to comprehend.
For everyone, it is complex.
So the simple question is, in one of your slides where Heidegger talked about the connection between mind and brain, where Heidegger said mind is an extension, not confined just to brain, but goes beyond. So my question is there any commonality or something that you could see through the evolution of the thoughts of cognition in terms of how these philosophers in the Western school of thought saw the connection between mind and brain? Is any simple
I mean, you
summary
can
could
see
give?
right from the beginning, from, like Thales onwards, because they don't, allow for any other entity than just atoms or matter or water or earth. So for them, your brain or mind is actually made of all that. So for them, your mind is just not here. It is also all over there in the world. So that is their conception of mind.
But conceptual, has he asked like when did this so-called the concept might have started? Did Aristotle before or after? Like the mind and brain as total entity, different entities, one controls the other.
See, the sociologists of knowledge, they claim it starts with Plato.
Okay.
And there was social reason for it. And they say it's coming of the slavery.
Okay.
As slavery developed in Greece and Rome, so they needed an external entity
Is there
that was needed for knowledge.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Is there a simple two schools of thought like essence preceding, the existence and existence preceding essence? Similarly, do we have any two schools of thought in regard to brain and mind are same? They are different. Is there anything like that? Or am I simplifying too much?
Oh, yeah. No, you can find, if you Google the controversy between brain and mind, you'll find a whole bunch of literature. And Beda, I must apologize to you. I wanted to talk about George Lukács because he's one of the very prominent Greek philosophers of the 20th century.
Yes.
But I just had too much material.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Sibaram, I have a question for you.
Covered a lot.
How did you come to know of the seminar? Because I just bumped into your name this morning.
Yes, sir. I got this, invitation posted in one of the Google groups by someone in the group.
Okay.
I'm part of that Google group, sir.
Okay, all right.
I would say,
because we are physically sealed off. Okay, all right.
I would say I'd like to add that the brain and the mind relationship. So I take the mind as a product of the working function of the brain. So to me, the mind is a product of a working function of the brain. That's it.
Right, Bella theory. All right. Now, I think now it's 11, rest part of the time we may spend in how you see this thought, this discussion relating to speech.
Satyendra has a question in the chat box.
Okay, all right. Who has? Satyendra, yes.
Yeah.
So this is Satyendra. I am I'm in the IDC team. And just small question for Jaspalji. You mentioned about the pre-existence of the object. So is that similar to our Satkaryavad?
I wouldn't comment.
What is it? What the word he said?
So pre-existence.
I think it's not very proper to mix categories.
Yes.
Like the Greek categories are very, very different, and when you translate them in English, like I find it very atrocious when I read Plato in Coney Greek, and then I read the Harvard translation in English. I told Dieter, I said, listen, I feel like crying, So, I mean, these categories, which we have to immerse ourselves in both traditions if you really want to find actual similarities. Otherwise, like I read like 4 translations of Rig Veda, and they were all atrocious.
Right.
You know.
Right. But that we can't take those up. I think it's unfortunate. What's it? Gupta 58. Who is it? Gupta 58.
Hello, Vijay sir. My name is Manish Gupta, and so I'm not showing my video because my hair is not combed properly. So I hope I don't have to switch on the video right now.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you. So I came across this about this IDC seminar, of course, via Google Scholar, and I had to write email to someone who was asking me who are you, and like that. So I had to give some reply. I think it was also to Professor Jaspal Singh also. So so I have one question, right, with respect to when we want to understand consciousness. I mean, do we want to understand it from like Western perspective, or we want to understand from from Indian thoughts? Because I've been living in Belgium from last 10 years, and so by profession I'm a vaccine scientist. I work in this with this vaccine guys and all who really. So right now we are working on coronavirus and all. So, but still, I mean, consciousness is something which everyone wants to look at, whether you are from science or arts or from whatever background. So my question in general, like to the whole team, like we want to understand consciousness from Western mind lens or Indian lens. I'm just curious.
See, today's presentation was not that tendentious. Today's presentation is just familiarizing ourselves with the thought material in the Western tradition.
Okay.
And for us, especially living in US and Europe and other places, it's important to be familiar with it. So that our agenda is very, very minimal. Like our agenda today was not to understand consciousness.
Okay. Because when you talk about consciousness, I mean, I've talked to many professors here. I mean, of course, they are not from this linguistic or doing some research in Sanskrit or Veda, but they are like a big name in the field of like colloidal science or particle physics or this and that. So I've interacted with, like, as the Big Bang theory has come out from Belgium. Like, so I worked in KU Leuven in my PhD. So when you talk to those people, they all are like, they don't, get this idea.
Right. No, I think don't bother. Don't just reject it.
Yeah, I reject it.
Everything that you're hearing.
I absolutely reject it.
Right, reject it and then try to think yourself, go from first principles. The world as painted for you by others is not the world you should live in. If you have a time and energy and strength, do think and do read, understand, and that's the new India which you should have. Indians did that in the past, so that's a whole different process. Let me go to this. Satyendra, was your question answered properly?
Yes, thank you.
So, Professor Machwe, do you have a comment?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, of course we can.
Yeah, it has been a great presentation. Before I speak anything, I am just a professor. I was a professor of physics. Have migrated to USA for the last 8 years. My uncle was philosopher, and all details they know. I have only one question here. That question is there any place of spirituality in Western philosophers? The Western philosopher literature, first point. Second point, Eastern philosophy is mostly dependent upon the old thought of mantras that is in Vedas. Is there any component in Western philosophy of that? Thank you.
Yes, spirituality is a good point. Jaspal, how is
let me come from the analytical or linguistic philosophy standpoint. So they say all questions of God and spirituality, they are misuse of language. That, for example, proposition like God exists is meaningless, or God does not exist is a meaningless proposition. It might make sense but it has no meaning. So that is the, that is the position of linguistic philosophers like Frege, Carnap, Riley, or even Russell. So they say all problems of philosophy or philosophical or spiritual statements, they cannot be solved, they can only be dissolved because that is misuse of language.
It's not Aristotle who said that the God doesn't need anything, and if it doesn't need anything, why does he exist?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, but Jaspal, if we follow this thing, whatever you have said, then the Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy will never meet. They won't overlap each other, or they don't understand each other. Whole of Indian philosophy, what I know, I may be wrong, is spiritually oriented, and from that orientation, they have found something. And impact of that is, there is a university, it is called the university by Khairagarh University in Madhya Pradesh. So in that university, a lot of work is done on music and singing. What they did, scientific experiment they did, that they played some music in some ragas before the plants, and the plants grew very nicely. So we may say that
but that has nothing to do with spirituality. That
we'll come to those. We'll come to that.
Talking,
like resonance. Like.
It's all right.
Mishra and I, we were talking about this.
Professor Mark, focus on today's talk. I think.
Yeah, I'm telling you. So where the cognition stands in between? That is my question.
Right. The plant and animal cognition, as you said, is being discussed lately, and he did not get into those, and so we shall see.
So actually, you should read one of my French friend, Vicente. She's written a very good book called "If the Animals Could Speak, What Would They Say?"
Another question.
Yeah, my name is Dev. Jaspal ji, I have a question. In the Western thinking, is consciousness a all-knowable field, or consciousness, part of consciousness is unknowable?
Can people all mute who are not in?
Well, when you generally, this is a question of epistemology.
Mm-hmm.
That what we can know, how we know.
Mm-hmm.
So the general view is that our knowledge is never complete. We only have relative knowledge. And as Hegel points out, our cognition goes through this dialectical process from one stage to another stage to another stage, and it's a continuous process. Mm-hmm. Hegel says that continues, until, infinity. So that knowledge, that's why right in the beginning he says that knowledge itself becomes an object. When he talks about sense certainty and all that. So, and I think generally in West, people do not say or, even contemplate end of knowledge. Or full knowledge that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is always more to know.
Okay. So it will be a part of it is unknowable.
But at each stage, there is things that are unknown.
Right. Thank you.
So Jaspal, that brings a question to mind, that when somebody says our knowledge is never complete, it's that it shows that person who is making the statement, he has a better knowledge or a greater knowledge. Yes. Otherwise, on what basis can he make that statement that our knowledge is never complete?
Because from your practice.
We're deviating. I think wait. This is why. I see you. Did you hear the talk? As a physician, do you have any comment? Dr. Dinesh Shah is here. Dinesh Shah is a distinguished physician from Florida. And if he heard things and has a clinical view, you want to comment. Can you unmute him or what is it? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please unmute him.
Okay, all right. Do you have any comment? How long have you been listening?
No, I joined in the middle of the thing, so I haven't listened the full lecture.
Okay.
But so far, whatever I heard is interesting of this difference between this mind and brain, or man and brain, and all those things. Sort of as a physical scientist, I find it interesting that what we call mind is nothing but final outcome of what brain does. And so that's my only comment here.
So mind is a product of the brain function.
Yeah, brain function, yeah.
Okay, any other question? Anybody has?
Yeah, Jaspalji, I have a question. This is Prem and Prem Nagar. I'm a part of India Discovery Center language group. So Jaspalji, I do not hear a distinction between perception and cognition, and which essentially means that how a new object is understood by the brain. None of these people have talked, or I have not understood whether they have talked. So is there something you are missing or I'm missing?
Well, for them, cognition is a very broad category under which there are many, many subcategories. And of course, all of them, they are not neuroscientists. So they don't have benefit of that science. Yeah, because that is one of the things that got me going in sort of a late 80s, that we know a lot about thought, but we know nothing about brain. So I started doing some courses at Harvard, on neuroscience, and also at MIT in brain and cognitive sciences. So the perspective that you are talking about, it is post facto. That is not their brief. They're mostly conceptual. So that's why, Heidegger, for example, he says there are these kinds of cognitions. And, he talks about embedded cognition, embodied cognition, affective cognition. So let us look at affective cognition. So your emotion somehow gets aroused, either internally or externally. And then it gets something going. So that registers something. And then what Gadamer will call, then that, affects your pre-understanding.
Or what we call changes your state.
Yes, changes your state, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And, you don't need language for it.
No, the pre-understanding assumes that you know everything.
No.
But nobody knows everything.
No, the pre-understanding means that your atmosphere, your historical context gives you a certain bias. Right. It comes through language, it comes through culture, it comes through, that is what, so one of the claims of Heidegger is that when you learn a language, you actually learn a worldview. Because how the language is structured. For example, in Hindi, we call moon Chanda Mama. So by learning that word Chanda Mama, you are learning an understanding of existence, that there is some relationship between Earth and Moon. Similarly, language biases you. So that is what they mean by pre-understanding.
I think he good that he detected the word pre-understanding, and the question is whether that should be the bias or that should be your internal preconditioning, how much that affects your, for example, like this talk is given and each of us listened our own way. So that our own way, is it conditioned by our predisposition of what we think as Western views are? So to have removed them is not easy and not doable. So that's the recognition of that I may have a sense of misperception, even though I detect it, but I may not perceive it right. So that has to be analyzed. And again, we do not have time today to really discuss that in full, but we shall come to that. I also noticed Sajed here. Sajed Saab. Sajed is a poet, distinguished poet, is a climate scientist. He is kind of has been into this universality for a long time. He doesn't have video probably. He has audio. Sajed, did you hear it all from Jaspal and any comment?
I think that you're always generous, Vijay, and that always teaches me about humility and also needing to respond with some respect. And in this case, respect both to you as well as Jaspal and the audience. Jaspal, it was an amazingly thoughtful and really brilliant presentation. I think that you brought a lot of, I think you take a piece of it and you could spend the whole day. But that to me, because what you did was really you put together a holistic view of this topic, and holistic doesn't mean everything, but its approach is holistic. And in a way, what you're pointing out is a lot of these thinkers were very compartmentalized.
Yeah.
See? And that's a very important distinction that you pointed out. As I'm saying, please correct me. So that's one thing. And to me, what is important is really to be able to value this, because we need to understand the details, but at the same time not get lost in details. And I think interpretation is also political, you see.
Yeah, yeah.
Very quickly, I just want to share one thing which is something that you mentioned, and a number of people mentioned, that we may know a lot of things, but what is the limit of knowledge? What is the limit of that knowing? And when we face that, how do we react? So I'll be very brief. When I was my undergraduate, I was thinking about doing a doctoral studies in philosophy, okay? So I was interviewing with a very distinguished Ivy League school in the area. So this person was interviewing me and he was asking me about all these different questions, and I was welcoming it. And from the very beginning, I said that, look, I will be able to answer you from what I know, but I'm wanting to get into this program because I want to know more. So I sort of took that humble position. So he could not just attack me for, any other way. But then our discussion went into Bertrand Russell, which I was very interested in, Bertrand Russell. So, and then he started asking me, and he was actually either the department chair or close to that, and he was an expert on logic. Okay. So he started really, which was basically questioning to literally sort of really asking me really how much I knew about Russell. So I, answered. He said that, okay, I'm convinced that you know a lot about Russell. What do you think his limitation is? So I thought about it, and then I said, well, in my mind, it's not a limitation, but what I really think is greatness of Russell is to see the limits of logic. He said, what? What is beyond logic? I said that, to me, logic is a way to understand, but there's more to know. And sometimes logic takes us a long distance, but it doesn't take us to what is there. And then I started talking about, Bertrand Russell became very interested in mysticism and intuition and literary aspects of this thing. Those are his real, very commitment. And he really got upset, really. I could just see that he was, because he could not see. So I came, I had the interview, I said, I know that, this may not be my place, whether I think or not, it may be mutual. He called the head of the philosophy department at Northeastern University, was undergraduate. He said, who is this fellow? He's questioning logic. So this department chair said, well, you know what? Just go easy with him, because I think that he's been my student, and he asked me some questions that still keeps me thinking. Anyway, so I appreciate all that you presented. It expanded my understanding and knowledge, and along with a lot of the comments that came. But I also recognize that how important it is to know more. And to your presentation has, that created that appetite in me. So thank you.
Sajid bhai, thank you. You should have told that department chair about Wittgenstein.
I also noticed Professor Bimal Jain. I don't know how long you have been noticed. Bimal Jain has, Bimal bhai, are you online?
Sir, I am sitting here.
All right. Did you hear Jaspal all through, or how much you listened?
No, Jaspal I couldn't hear because I came late.
Oh. So how much did you hear?
I'm
by
just,
the way,
I'm
Professor
just,
Jain is here. He's a Jain scholar, has been in this country for last several years, but taught in Bhopal for a long time, and was a part of the Indian Jain Assembly, and is considered as the most prominent Jain scholar of the time. And he helps us in IDC in our work, and has been a personal mentor to me in many ways. But do you have any particular comment you want to share to the group?
because I just couldn't hear much of the talk. But I am only attending to the questions that are happening.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So we'll have the video. We'll send you the video. Feel free to review it and then comment. What we did was try to see how the Western literature has viewed this question of cognition as a human activity, such that I cognize you. For example, I saw your name there. Did I detect it? So what prompted in my mind? So those kind of processes. So the question is whether I detect, something else in me detects, my mind detects, my consciousness detects. So those kind of things did come through, and he kind of presented a thorough historical document, evolution of the thoughts. I also see Professor Balachandra. Professor Balachandra is a computer scientist, has been Northeastern for 50 or more years. And
Oh my Lord.
Balaji, where are you hiding?
I don't know, Balaji. Can you have a comment? Do you have a comment at all?
Yes.
Will you hear it all?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Dr. Balachandra, I am hearing you.
Okay, good. Let me see. I don't know how to put on the video.
Turn on your video.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. Where do I go that? Okay, video. Okay, there we go. Come on. Okay.
Okay, there you are. Okay, all right.
Okay, Jaspal, it was a very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it very much. I have a couple of points I wanted to make. When I look at the thing you have presented, all of these ideas are purely mentally created. There was no experimentation, there was nothing, it was purely mentally created. So they come up with different ideas based on previous thinking and add their own contributions and then come up with these new theories. Now, how is it any different from our Indian thinking, our Indian philosophers who went through the same kind of logical thinking about the ideas, about cognition, about all these mental states? They have come up with that. And I would like to see someone look at that in our next meeting. Hopefully, Vijay will organize something about the Indian approach to these cognition and things like that.
Yeah, we'll thought about that. We will.
Yeah,
we will
but that was my issue when I heard you, when I heard Jaspal for this past 1 hour, that all of these things have come up through their mental thinking. And one of the biggest complaints against Indian approach to things is that, well, we don't do any experiments. We just go on basis of some ideas that we get in our head. So that's my only comment I wanted to make.
Dr. Balachandra, what I have to say is that in our philosophy, in our thinking, everything comes from the soul. The consciousness is within the soul.
Yes.
And everything, even the desire to speak and to say something, it all comes from within. It is not so much, it does not belong so much to the objects. It is subjective, mostly subjective. And when the soul takes something into its consciousness, into its thought, then it is the soul that starts the thinking about what is it, what could it be, and things like that. So for us,
we'll come to that. I think we're at 11:30 now. I have the last person, the only woman in the whole group, Miss Nina Wahi. She's a poet, she's a teacher, and has been patiently hearing all this. She's a neighbor to Jaspal. So does Nina ji, your last comment, and we close after that.
I enjoyed the talk and it was very informative, especially these complicated matters. It was easy to understand the way he presented it. The presentation was very good. Thank you, Jaspal ji.
Any question or comment on the overall thing?
I'm not his neighbor anymore. I moved to Honolulu.
That's okay. Oh, okay.
So I'm like 6 hours behind. So it's 5:30 here.
Oh, what a pity. Really.
I got up at 3:30 to listen to the presentation.
So 3:30 you got up to be in the seminar?
Thank you.
Wow.
That's dedication, Mike.
What a commitment. So any thought you have as a woman on, for example, women are kind of, as I have seen, they have this parapsychology. They know things with a child from a distance, which is not covered in any of these discussions. So cognition as not a sensory perception, but as a parasensory perception. Do you have any comment on such kind of thinking at all, or that's bogus, or it has any merit?
No.
It's bogus? Like the perception from a distance, from an intuition as a... So anyway, so think about it. If you have any comment to...
I'll email. I'll write some more in email.
Okay, all right.
But it was
so anyway, so all people, let us thank them all. I think we have covered almost everyone who is here. And then I think we have to thank Manish and Chandu. So Chandu is the one who acted as a host for the meeting. And Manish...
There is one more person, Vijayji.
Who is that?
This Bhavike Nathwani.
Oh.
There is one more gentleman.
Oh, he's a research scholar here in Harvard. Mr. Bhavik. Bhavik? Do you have any comment? Mr. Nathwani?
I'm here.
Okay. Do you have any comment on what you heard, or introduce yourself?
This was a fantastic presentation. For technical reasons, I had to jump in and out. There was some video difficulties. So first about
you are a research scholar in which school?
At Harvard Medical School. I'm in synthetic biology, way farther down from cognition. But there were some really beautiful ideas, and I have quite a few follow-ups. And I was wondering if there would be an opportunity for a broader discussion on some of the beautiful ideas that were brought up during Jaspal's presentation. Namely, there are all sorts of details about that were presented about cognition and about Western thought and so on. But what about ideas of epigenetics and how some of the experiences get carried forward and so on? And so I recognize that time is short, and maybe if Jaspal has a couple of quick thoughts on this, that would be fantastic to hear. But otherwise, I was wondering if there would be an opportunity for a fuller discussion on the topic.
I think what we'll do is, which we did not do, we'll give you references. Because this needs, I think, again, what we're avoiding is any freewheeling questioning and then interpretation.
I understand.
But any cultivated thought and so on, because in India discovery, our goal is either we know or you don't know. Because hand waving has been gone for a long time, and we all raised ourselves in hand waving operations. So the question is whether future generation, like yours also, whether they would have more exact understanding or say, I don't know. So that thing is the goal of India discovery. So we will give you references and then join us when you can. If you want to be a part of our language group and so on, which will give you that understanding.
Would love to.
Time commitment, because language is a difficult topic. And this, but if you are in biology and synthetics, probably you have some ideas. Basic idea is, or what you are thinking is, how does the neural energy, how does the neural network convert itself into acoustics? And that process, how much of information exchange gets lost in the process? And then what is the rendering mechanism? Suppose it happens, in what form it happens, and then where do the oral components come in? So whether there's a pre-conditioning of the language in the brain, which eventually manifests as sound waves through our mind, our mouth. So we'll give you those and try to study, not that we understand it. This is a thought. So we developed it and join us. So we
would love to stay in touch.
Very good, very good. Anybody else? I think since nobody else is there, shall we close?
No, Vijay, there is one more. Prashanta Bhuna. Bhunia.
I don't see him. Okay, Prashant, are you here?
Yeah, Bhaina, namaskar. I am here, Bhaina.
Okay, what do you have to say? Or did you hear it all?
Yeah, no, just I joined right now, Bhaina.
Oh, then we are
Yeah.
that doesn't mean.
Sorry about that.
We start 9:30. All right. Good that you join next time or study up and so on. Okay. So can we thank Jaspal? How do you thank Jaspal? So I think turn on your videos and then note yourselves or clap or do something.
That's what we'll do.
Jaspal, it was excellent.
Thank you. Very good. You are great audience.
And then if any of you want to have any studies or wish to do any studies about biology, the process of neurology, the process of grammar, the process of understanding, so you can let me know and we can host you. Because our goal is not necessarily to understand what others have said, also to think what we can say.
Yeah.
Then I will try to present the Indian view in a couple of months, and then we will inform you. Now we had 40 people, some are 20 showed up. So I don't know the frivolous, but whatever it is, I thank you all for coming and thank Jaspal for a beautiful work. I don't know how long it took you, but you really made my mind full. Yesterday I was so happy. I said, wow, okay. Because these things we know in general, but we did not know systematically or did not learn systematically. So I think you helped us open quite a bit of vista in this process. Thank you. And
thank you very much. It helped me to revise.
When will we have next session?
And clear my own ideas. Thank you.